Hi there. Welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to the space. Okay, so today I've got the MacBook Pro computer, and we're going to take the tracks that we've recorded so far from the Zoom, go into here, then from here, go into the program Audacity, which is a free download if you want to try that one. And we're going to clean the tracks up, do some little tweaking here and there, then back into the Zoom where they'll be renamed, and then we can start sorting our tracks and getting ready for mixing and mastering. So that's what the next episode will be about. But today's episode is about the cleanup of the tracks. So what I'm going to do, and by the way, the vocals turned out pretty well yesterday. That'll be one of the things that I'll be working on when I get it into the computer. But I want to just take a few example tracks and show you what I do with each one of them. Going all the way back to the drum recordings, I'll be doing the snare, the overheads, the bass drum. Then I'll be working on the bass guitar, the electric guitars, the two guitar tracks plus the solo. Let's see, and then all the vocal tracks, the main vocal, any of the harmony / extra double tracked vocals, all of those will have to be cleaned up as well. Then all of that will get renamed back onto the Zoom, and I'll start my mixing and mastering process. So the first step is to connect the USB cable from the MacBook Pro to the Zoom and have the Zoom read the USB on this. And you'll have to start this with the software that comes with the Zoom. You'll need to make sure that your computer has that software on it so that it can communicate with the Zoom. So that would be the first thing you want to do, is go to the R24, the Zoom driver updates, and find the driver that allows you to connect it to your computer. And what'll be cool about what's great about that is I think that Cubase, I think that software, you can actually control your computer with the Zoom. I never got into that because, like I said, I like to just sort of be in the box working with the faders, like old school. But if you wanted to integrate the Zoom with your computer, you could do something like that. But today we're going to just connect. I'm going to drag the files from the Zoom to the computer. We're going to clean up, output, then we'll be back in the Zoom for mixing and mastering. So here we go. I'm going to bring the camera forward, set it up here so that you can see the Zoom and the computer screen and watch my sort of workflow that I do with the tracks. And I pretty much do the same thing with all of the tracks, but I do have to usually spend a little more time on the vocals. But we'll take a couple of sample tracks. I'll show you the process, and then you can have, that'll sort of arm you with some information about what you can do with yours at home. So let's do it. Okay, now we're going to connect the USB cable that comes with the Zoom. That goes over here. It's got sort of a special connector here. And then on this end, we're going to go into the computer. If you're using a Mac, like a MacBook Pro, it'll be the first slot. That's the number 3 slot. If you're starting from the back and count it, it's 1, 2, 3, and that's supposed to be the best one for audio video on a Mac. Okay, so now we're connected from the Mac to the Zoom, and now we're going to move in on the Zoom, and I'll show you the settings. Okay. Now, we're going to go to the USB button here, right there. I'm going to come down with this thing here, 1, to the reader spot. You'll see that it says reader. Hopefully you can see that on the screen, but it says reader. Okay, now, I'm going to hit the enter button here, and now you can see it says card reader. Now we're going to go over to the computer and see if it's found it on the computer yet. Okay, so now we're here, and I can see that it is on the screen, so now we can open it. So, we've got the Zoom connected to the computer via the USB. Now, I'm going to show you what I do once I get inside the computer. I tried to film the computer screen, but, or video the computer screen, but the refresh rate of the computer versus the camera did not work. So I'm just going to do some screen captures. Okay, so now, once we connect with the USB, you're going to see an icon come up on your computer. Now, this is after you first must go to zoom.com R24, find their drivers, make sure you have the newest driver installed on your computer so your computer can interact with the Zoom. Once you have that software in place, restart your computer, connect with the Zoom, and you should see this Zoom SD icon on the screen. That should be right there. Now, what you're going to want to do is you're going to click on that icon and open it up. And you'll see that it just says the Zoom R24. It's like a little folder there sitting there waiting for you. Now, you're going to click on that. That's going to open up. You'll now see Project and System. You're going to avoid System for now, or you hardly ever will use System, but you're going to go into Project. Once you click on Project, you will now see all these song titles that I have, one after another in alphabetical order. And the titles are usually, I think they're 6 characters long, so they're not always the full title of the song. I'll just write something so I know what the song is. And in this case, it's going to be Are You, which is the 3rd title down. And the song's actually called Are You Ready? But it's the 3rd one down entitled Are You. Okay, now I click on the Are You folder, which opens up all of our data, our metadata, and the audio folder. Okay, so now we're going to want to open that audio folder, double click on the audio folder, and now you see all these other tracks that I've recorded. And I will then move it down to, I'm going to go through the tracks here and I find snare A. So I have, I've tripled these snares actually. And they're all the same snare. So it doesn't matter which one I choose. I've already done the work here. So I'm kind of showing you what I did after the fact. But I'm going to take snare A and I'm going to drag snare A out onto the desktop. So you can see that it's now over here on the desktop to the left. Okay, and then once you get it on the desktop, you're going to then drag it into Audacity. You can either import it, and in my case, I just take the file and just sort of move it over to the program, to the application itself, which then opens the application, and the file just imports right in as it opens. Okay, and now you can see that we have this kind of file here, and it looks pretty good. You can see that it's not peeking out or anything, and I've actually already worked on this file, so it looks pretty good. This is sort of the end result. But I'm going to show you what I usually do once I bring the files in, how I affect the WAV file, and then send it back out. Okay, so I'm going to go up here to Effect. So you're going to go up to Effect on Audacity or whatever program you're using. And these are the things that I do. I go to Effect, and as you can see, it kind of reveals all your different choices, which is really cool. And then I'm going to go down to Noise Reduction. That's the one I'm going to choose. And then when I choose that one, you can see that this panel comes up that says Noise Reduction, Get Noise Profile, Noise Reduction dB, Sensitivity, Frequency Smoothing Bands. I have 3, and I kind of went, like 30% here. I've got it at 1 dB sensitivity, and my noise reduction is at 48. So, and then I'm reducing. So, and then I'm also could do it on residue. So what I'm basically trying to do with this noise reduction thing is I just wanted to get rid of some of the extra sound in the room. I did some sound design on a film once, and they go through and really clean up all the sound and make it just take away a lot of the ambient garbage and hash and whatnot, just like stuff that you don't want in the recording, because the space that I'm using, and a lot of times if you're recording at home, it's not like an ideal recording space. So I try to get rid of some of that, but I just do it a very subtle amount, like 1 dB worth, just to take some of that noise away. Sometimes you can't tell at all. Sometimes it just makes you feel better, especially the cumulative effect of it. So if each track gets cleaned up a little bit and some of that sound is removed, it has less of a tendency to build up over tracks and get bigger and nastier. Okay, so that's noise reduction, and you can sort of play around with the levels and decide how much you want to do. You might want to do more than I'm doing, but that's something I usually do first. I don't know, that's sort of my sequence. Now, from noise reduction, I usually move to filtration. So I'm going to go back to that effect, back to effects, or back to effect, and I'm going to scroll down until I see classic filters. I'm going to click on classic filters, and classic filters is going to bring up the panel. I've got it on the first filter type 1. The subtype is high pass, order 1. The cutoff is 100 hertz. You can adjust that any way you want. That's just what I've kind of been doing. I might not cut it off as much on the bass drum, but on the snare, on vocals, guitars, I'm definitely going to run it through this high pass, and I think it really takes away a lot of garbage. So I highly recommend that. Okay, so now after I do that, I'm going to come out, and we could check equalization at this point. You could try the doing some equalization. I will warn you that equalization is kind of tricky. Sometimes I'll just go back to effects and I'll go to bass and treble and try to just add a little bass and treble. But unless you really know what you're doing, you can really kind of get in the woods, into the weeds, so to speak, with equalization. So I'm going to just do maybe a little bass and treble enhancement, but more than likely I'm not going to do any of that. The main goal that I have at this point is just to clean the tracks up a little bit, name the track, and then send it back into the Zoom. And then sometimes double it. Okay, so after I do that, let's see, I might do some amplification. Amplification helps also because sometimes your levels are a little wonky. Let's say at some point in the track you might have hit the drum too hard and it caused it to peak. Well, now the amplification will only peak as high as that is. So you want to kind of find the spots that might have peaked too much or might be distorting if you've got a couple of those. And you can go back and just sort of spot clean them up. You just highlight them, go to amplify, and then just take it down 3 dB or something like that. And then you can amplify the entire track from that point and try to get it up to something like -1.2. That's what I do on the master. On these, I'm not going to worry about amplifying too much, but that is something you can do. You could go through if the track just sounded weak and anemic. Every once in a while, I've had a bass part that needed to be amplified, and I might boost it 3 dB in here so that when I bring it in here, it's already sort of at the volume that I want it to be, and I don't have to push the faders up so much, especially if at 100, if it still doesn't sound powerful. I will also sometimes double the bass, because we're plugging it straight in. We could have done something like off ahead, so we'd have another signal, or you can just double the signal. Now, the way I double the signal is pretty simple. After I complete one of these files, let's say I want to have 2 versions of the snare drum. After I complete the file, I'll just drag it onto the desktop, rename it snare B or snare 2, and then drag it back in. And now I have snare A, snare B, snare 1, snare 2, whatever you want to call it. But it just makes it a little easier to it just makes it understandable, so that when you go back in here, you know which tracks are which, and they're named, and it's easier to work with at that point instead of having these sort of mono 00 or mono 001. It now says snare A, snare B, so you can drop it in where you want to and start panning and whatnot. And I'm going to do all of these steps that I've just showed you, basically bringing it in from the Zoom from the USB, doing a little noise reduction just on some of the ambient noise that we don't want, and you have to sample that. You sample a spot that you want to get rid of on that noise profile, then you hit enter, and then it does its thing. So I'll do a little bit of that. I'm going to do some classic filters on the effects panel, and that would be the high cut filter at about 100 hertz. After that, I'm going to, maybe it needs compression. I'll check compression, but I don't typically do much compression at this point. Hardly ever, actually. I'll do a little bit while recording, and then I don't usually push it too much unless it really helps. Sometimes on the vocal, sometimes if you compress the vocal and some of the drums, you might have to do that. But overall, I don't use tons of compression. I try to stay away from it because it just sort of pushes everything to the top, and you don't get a lot of dynamics, and it sounds just forced, like it's a little too hot. So you got to be careful with compression, but I do use it sparingly. So I'm going to I just go through all the things that I want to do with each track. After I'm done, I output it. If I want to double it, I drag it onto the desktop, rename it, and then put both versions into the Zoom. So after I'm done, everything goes back into the Zoom. Once you get everything back into the Zoom, let's see here, you're going to want to, after you've done all this work, before you go back into the Zoom, the way you get that file, export audio. So you're going to go up here to the Audacity program, and you're going to come down to export audio. And then once you get that export audio to come up, you can see it here. You get a little panel here. I saved it as money, but typically that's because when I was doing the screen capture, it took away the title. But we would call this something like snare A. So you type in snare A, it would go to your desktop. You could save it as a WAV file. This one is saving it as a AIFF Apple file, because that's whenever I'm recording anything for YouTube. Final Cut Pro seems to like the Apple files better. I usually would output in a WAV file, just because it seems like those work everywhere. But anyway, here's your export, and then we're going to save the export. But then when I'm done, I do not save this entire file, because it'll save a really pretty heavy file on your computer that there's really no need for. Because once again, we still have the original track in the Zoom. I keep all those, I don't throw anything away. So I can always go back to that original track, original unaltered digital file. This is now an altered file that's been cleaned up and worked on in Audacity. So we want to export it out of the computer, but we don't want to save the entire project. I mean, you can if you want to, but it's going to take up a lot of disk space and whatnot, and there's not much point in it. Unless you unless it's a special one that you spent a lot of time on and it was really difficult, I might save one of those. I've never have before, but I'm thinking of it now, and I could see a reason that you would want to save a file like that, and as a project, if it took you a long time to get everything just so. But ordinarily, after I export it, I do not save that project. I just take the exported file, go into the Zoom, and then sometimes I'm going to double it by renaming it and bringing that into the Zoom. Now we're going to go back to the Zoom. I'm going to show you what the tracks look like in here and how I arrange them so that I can begin my mixing and mastering process. Okay, now we've done our cleanup work on the computer. Once we've named that file on our computer on the desktop and we've put it into the Zoom, back into the Zoom, so now instead of it saying only mono 001 and mono 00, all the sort of generic titles, now we have actual titles of the tracks. So mono 001 has now become snare A. And we're going to drag that in, and now we know that that is our snare track. So we want to place it back in the Zoom, right? So now when we come back into the Zoom, we're going to go to the track button. And you should see these tracks here now. When you hit that track button, you come down here to the little wheel thing to the left of the wheel and you hit enter. It's now going to give you all the options for the tracks. The tracks that are in the Zoom, you can put any one of those in that position. So I'm going to go to the third bank. I'm going to go to track 17 because I want to put my snare drum in first. Just start with the drums. I go to track. I'm going to press on it and I'm going to look for snare A. Once I find snare A, I'm going to come back down here and hit enter. And now track 17 is snare A. Track 18 will be snare B. Track 19 will be the left overhead. And I'm going to pan that a little bit to the left. And then the right overhead will be, and I'm sorry, that will be the double of the left overhead. They're both kind of panned to the left. And then we're going to have our two right tracks, or right overhead tracks, in tracks 21 and 22. They'll be off to the right a bit. And then we'll have our bass drum in 7 and in 8, bass drum 1 and bass drum 2. Now you don't have to do any of this doubling. I just do it because it makes it sound a little more robust. And once again, the way I do it is when I do the cleanup work on the computer, I'm going to bring it onto the desktop, rename it, so it's snare B now instead of snare A, and then put that in the Zoom as well. So now in the Zoom, we've got snare A, and we dragged in a copy of snare A that we've titled snare B. There's probably another smarter way to do this. I'm probably doing it the goofiest way ever, but it works for me, and that way I know that I've got doubled versions of all the drums. Okay, so, and at any point when you're on this track button, you can change the tracks. So let's say you decide that you want to move them around. You not only can swap them from the swap switch, but you can go to track and you can click on it, hit enter, and then just scroll through and figure out which one you want to put there and put it there. It takes the one that you had in there away and puts it back into the file that you can go then retrieve later and put it somewhere else. Or just never use it again and it'll just stay in the machine. So that is the process of how we come out of the Zoom, go into the computer, use a program like Audacity or whichever one you want to use, do whatever you want to do to it, clean it up, high pass filter, maybe do some compression, some EQ, some reverb, whatever you want to do. Output that to the desktop, drag it into the Zoom's hard drive, then exit out of the computer, come in here and assign all that work you did to the track. So like, let's say we did all the tracks. We had done the 2 guitars, the 4 drums, the bass part, anything else, the vocals, any guitar work that we're going to do. We will take all those tracks and assign them based on their name on the Zoom. So you can put them in any order you want, change them at any point that you want. But I like to have them all in there and have them named, and have them in a position that sort of makes sense to me, as if I'm working on an old school, studio board. So that's the way I set it up. You might figure out a way to do it much better than the way I'm doing it. Like I said, I'm not the best with the whole computer editing thing. I'm just using the computer to enhance it, because the Audacity does some nice cleanup work, especially the high pass filtration, the normalization of not normalization. And that's another thing you can do. You can normalize all your tracks, but you usually do that after compressing. And like I said, I'm not doing a lot of compressing right now. At the mastering stage, there might be some compression involved. But I'm excited also to show you what all you can do in the Zoom as far as mixing and mastering, and that will be in the next episode. So hopefully this wasn't too confusing. And once I see the video and see the footage I've shot, if it doesn't play out well, I'll add to this to make it make more sense. So anyway, now, and I've also decided that I'm going to add an acoustic guitar track to this, and that's a little trick that I've employed before, where you have the electric guitar going, and it's not the type of song that you're waiting to hear on an acoustic guitar, but with the acoustic guitar mixed like really low in the mix and just mimicking the part that I'm playing on the electric guitar, and then I keep it really low in the mix, so you almost don't know it's there unless you have really keen sense of hearing and hear these types of things. But it gives a little more percussive quality and a little more life. And I like the sound of the acoustic and the electric mixed together. It almost sounds like you've got something going on with the drums too. It's like you've got an extra bit of percussion happening. So I like that. I like what the acoustic guitar does. I remember reading an article many years ago where Keith Richards said something to the effect that if you're having trouble with a track and you can't make it sound the way you want, putting an acoustic guitar on it can sometimes help. It's like glue. That's what he called it, glue. So anyway, we're going to get a little glue, and then we're going to come and do another episode later after we record the acoustic guitar, and we're going to mix and master the track, and then we'll finally be done. So until next time, thanks again for watching. I really appreciate it.